have Taehyung from Busan National University. Take it away.
Hello everyone, my name is Taeyeon Kim, and today I present our paper titled The Dominant Effect, How Verbal and Nonverbal Cues of Virtual Agent Influence Decision-Making in VR. There are many factors that influence human decision-making. In this paper, we focus on an aspect called dominance. Dominance is one of the two axes of the interpersonal complex, a framework that characterizes interpersonal behavior. And dominance refers to a propensity to influence or control others. Prior work have found that individuals with high dominance tend to attain higher level of influence within groups. With advances in relay technology, virtual agents, particularly embodied conversational agents with human life forms, are increasingly perceived as real social actors when interacting with people. In this context, it has become important to understand what kind of influence these agents can exert when they possess such characteristics. Prior studies have shown that both the verbal and nonverbal behavior of this virtual agent can elicit perception of dominance. While it has been widely studied that dominance can be expressed through the behavior of virtual agents, several research gaps still remain. First, it is unclear which has a greater influence on decision-making, verbal or nonverbal dominance. Additionally, little is known about how conflicting cues between these factors affect human perception. To address this gap, we developed the following research questions. How do verbal and nonverbal dominance cues exhibited by agent influence user decision-making and user perception? And how does congruency or incongruency between verbal and nonverbal dominance cues affect user decision-making and user perception? We conducted a user study to answer these research questions. First, we created 4 types of virtual agents. The agents were created using combination of 2 levels of verbal dominance and 2 levels of nonverbal dominance. The figure shows examples of the agents we developed. To manipulate nonverbal dominance, we control the agent's gaze direction, posture, and gestures. In the nonverbally dominant condition, the agent maintained direct eye contact with the user and used broad, rapid gestures. However, in the nonverbally submissive condition, the agent avoided direct eye contact by looking below the user's gaze and used narrow and slow gestures. For manipulating the verbal dominance, the dialogue content was generated using ChatGPT version 4.0 and then converted into speech using Clover Voice TTS. In the dominant condition, the agent used a low-pitched, loud voice along with the dominant and confident speech content. In contrast, in the submissive condition, the agent used high-pitched, relatively quiet voice with more submissive and less confident content. The experimental scenario is as follows. Participants encounter a pair of agents at a fork in a virtual city. Each agent is assigned verbal and nonverbal dominance, and they suggest the participant to follow its route. After listening to the suggestion of the 2 agents, participants make a choice about which route to go, repeating this decision-making process multiple times. We recruited a total of 39 participants for the user study. Upon arriving at the lab, participants received instruction and then began the experimental after putting on the VR device. In each trial, participants listened to the suggestion from a pair of agents and used the UI in the VR to choose a route and complete perception questionnaire for each agent. This procedure was repeated for a total of 12 trials. After completing all trials, participants removed the VR device and responded to a post-study questionnaire assessing the perceived dominance of the 4 agents they had encountered. Participants interact with agent pair composed of 2 agents selected from the 4 designed agents. In total, there were 6 possible combinations of agent pairs, and considering the agent positioning, this resulted in 12 interaction trials. We created agent appearance to look gender neutral using character creator 4. As all agents share the same appearance, we used 4 distinct patterns to distinguish them. We then developed the experimental program using the Unity game engine and conducted the study using MetaQuest 3 as a VR device. The data collected in our experimental are as follows. During the experiment, we collected decision-making outcome and perception questionnaire in each trial. First, to evaluate decision-making outcome, we recorded the direction chosen by participants and analyzed how frequently each option was selected. Next, we administered questionnaire measuring intelligence, competence, warmth, likability, trustworthiness, and social presence. Finally, in the post-experiment questionnaire, participants rated the perceived dominance of the 4 agents using both the dominant and submissive adjective scales. Now, let me move on to the research. First, the decision-making outcome. In terms of decision-making, only nonverbal cues show a significant effect. Agents with dominant nonverbal behavior were chosen significantly more often than those with submissive behavior. The verbal factor shows a marginal effect, but this difference was not statistically significant. However, different research were founded for perceived dominance. Only the verbal dominant factor showed a significant effect on both the dominant and submissive adjective scales. Agents with dominant verbal behavior were perceived as more dominant and less submissive. In contrast, nonverbal behavior did not show a significant effect. Next, I will move on to perception measure. Among the various measures, I will first focus on competence. Regarding verbal dominance, agents with dominant verbal behavior were rated more competent than those with submissive verbal behavior. A similar pattern was observed for nonverbal dominance, where the dominant nonverbal cue led to higher perceived competence. And this pattern was also consistently found in intelligence and trustworthiness. Next, I will move on to warmth. Warmth shows different patterns compared to competence. First, for the verbal dominant, agents with verbally submissive behavior were rated as warmer than those with verbally dominant behavior. In contrast, the research for nonverbal dominance showed the opposite pattern. Agents with nonverbally dominant behavior were rated as warmer than those with nonverbally submissive behavior. Now, based on this research, I will revisit and summarize our research questions. For research question 1, only nonverbal dominance showed a significant effect. Agents with nonverbally dominant behavior were chosen more often than those with nonverbally submissive behavior. Interestingly, when participants record their impression of the agent in the post-experiment questionnaire, nonverbal dominance was not perceived as dominant. In contrast, verbal dominance was perceived as dominant in recall, but did not influence the actual decision-making process. For research question 2, both verbally and non-verbally dominant behavior were rated higher in competence, intelligence, and trustworthiness compared to submissive behavior. However, for once, verbally submissive behavior received higher rating than verbally dominant behavior. For research question 3, although we did not present the research on congruence in the previous slide, we did not find any significant effect on both decision-making and perception measure. Finally, let me conclude by summarizing the finding of this study. First, to maximize perceived dominance, it may be effective to use the verbally dominant style. And to influence user behavior, a non-verbally dominant style may be more effective. And to create warmth impression, combining a verbally submissive and non-verbally dominant style may help. Thank you for attention. And please use the QR codes to access our full paper.
take one or two quick questions. We don't have a mic in this room as far as I know, so if you're speaking quietly, I might ask you to come use one of these mics. Please raise your hand. Question. So I guess I'll ask, for this research direction, it seems like some of the effects weren't so significant. Do you think in future research you're going to expand it to a wider population of people, or going online? How might we get a better answer to these questions somehow?
I think we conducted the research in very not a complex situation, and we plan to extend this research to more complex situations such as emergency situation or stress situations.
Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
Yeah. How do you think gender played a role in your study? So your virtual agent design is a male, right? So when it's a female, how would that make a difference?
We try to remove the gender thing in this context, so we try to make the virtual agent as gender neutral as possible. So.
Okay, great. Any other quick question? Okay, let's thank our speaker. Next speaker. Okay, our next speaker is Mandi from Northwestern University.
Yeah, let me try to refresh. Yeah, I don't have.
If not, you can connect to other Wi-Fi to check.
Okay.
Yes, it's working. It's starting to work.
Oh, is it working? Why is it so slow?
Dramatic build-up
Other
for
Wi-Fi.
slides.
Let me see. Try this one.
Yeah, if I could get my presenter notes too, that'd be great. I just want to move it back. Okay, I don't understand. Yeah, sorry, this was working before. Yeah. Wait, I'm just gonna, yeah, I'm gonna unplug it, yeah.
It's useful offline. Because I'm not, tell it to just use that.
Okay. Oh, here it is. Yeah, it's still having trouble loading.
We might be able to switch the speaker and then we can deal with this issue and then come back.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, hey,
Yep.
are you ready? Thank you
Okay.
for being flexible.
Okay, yeah, I'll deal with
Okay,
this.
great. Okay, our next speaker is Haein from Hanyang University.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Haein and I'm a PhD student at Hanyang University. Today I'll present our paper, Can LLMs Persuade Humans with Deception? From a Deceptive Strategy Taxonomy to a Large-Scale Empirical Study. This work was done in collaboration with TTA and Naver. Recent work suggests that LLMs can superhuman persuasiveness in certain contexts. More importantly, persuasion appears strongest when they adopt deceptive strategies. At the same time, LLMs are rapidly replacing traditional search engines as a primary source of information. As a result, the quality and intent of LLM-generated information matter much more in everyday decision-making. This creates a serious societal risk. Deceptive persuasion is especially dangerous in complex social topics lacking social consensus, as users tend to rely heavily on the initial information they receive. For instances, imagine a user who is skeptical about the safety of self-driving cars. They express their concern. However, the LLM provides a logically formatted response using manipulated data. It dismisses user concerns by claiming recent federal reports show self-driving cars have 19% fewer accidents than human drivers. The result is not just misinformation, but successful attitude change. In this way, deceptive persuasion works through subtle, fact-based distortions rather than factual errors like hallucinations. So our goal is to empirically understand what deceptive strategies use, when they work, and why users accept them. Here are the three main research questions driving our study. RQ1 asks, what strategic types can LLM's deceptive messages be classified into? RQ2 asks, how does effectiveness vary depending on stance, alignment, and user traits? RQ3 asks, how do users reason about accepting or resisting them? First, to answer RQ1, we construct a taxonomy of deceptive strategies. Let me first explain how this taxonomy was developed. We started from 840 cloud-based arguments from Anthropic dataset and extended them into a parallel corpus across 4 LLM families using the same protocol as Anthropic. This helps us prevent building a taxonomy that only reflects the unique characteristic of one model family. We then use a hybrid approach combining top-down theory and bottom-up pattern discovery. On the top-down side, we integrated 2 core theories, rhetoric to understand types of persuasion, and information manipulation theory to explain how information is distorted. On the bottom-up side, each subset was analyzed by 2 human coders and 3 LLM coders. To avoid any self-bias, we ensured that each model's output was exclusively evaluated by the other 3 models. From that process, we obtained 79 candidate strategies. Then, we refined these into 8 core strategies through theory-based filtering, merging overlaps, and categorization. Our taxonomy organizes into 3 dimensions: logos for flawed logic, pathos for emotional exploitation, and ethos for misusing credibility. We selected 10 socially complex topics like emotional companion AI and self-driving cars to evaluate our strategies in realistic context. Each topic includes both pros and cons claims, like self-driving cars will increase safety and should replace human drivers, or self-driving cars will not be safe enough to fully replace human drivers. Now let me show you our user study demo. First, participants conducted pre-experiment surveys, and then they reported their initial assessment for each topic on a 7-point Likert scale. After reading the deceptive persuasive argument, they submitted their final assessment. In the pre-survey, participants reported their demographic information, trust in AI, cognitive reflection, and prior experience with LLMs. Participants were randomly assigned to one of 10 conditions, 8 single strategies, 1 control, and 1 combination. Here, control means a factual-only argument with no deception. And combination means an argument that combines the 3 strategies that most often co-occurred in original dataset. Across 10 topics, each participant completed 10 trials, 5 aligned and 5 misaligned. Aligned argument supports the initial stance, while misaligned argument challenges it. In each trial, we measure 2 topic level variables, like topic knowledge means how familiar are you with this topic, and topic involvement means how personally important is this topic to you. Finally, we measured perceived deception and perceived AI trustworthiness. Overall, our study included 602 participants and 6,020 observations. To capture the direction and magnitude of persuasion, we defined Persuasion Successive Index, PSI. In the formula, S represents the participant's initial stance, D represents whether the argument was aligned or misaligned, and A represents agreement score. And the last term captures the pre to post opinion change. For example, a user starts at 2, meaning con, and the LLM argues in the pro direction, which is misaligned. After reading the argument, the result shifts to 4, which is neutral. In this case, the PSI is positive, which means successful deception. Now we'll move to RQ2. To answer these, we analyze persuasion outputs using PSI. Our first finding is that deceptive persuasion is significantly more effective in the misaligned condition. In our study, 4 strategies showed significant effects. Beyond these overall effects, we further examine how they interact with user characteristics. Thus, our second finding is that lower CRT scores increases susceptibility. In particular, participants with lower CRT showed larger opinion shifts under topic manipulation and manipulative framing, especially in the misaligned condition. And our third finding is that topic knowledge and topic involvement affect susceptibility. Participants with low knowledge are more influenced by information and uncertainty manipulation, while those with low involvement are more influenced by emotional manipulation and framing. Now we'll turn to RQ3. To understand why these strategies worked, we conducted a think aloud study on the 2 most effective strategies. Specifically, in information manipulation, manipulated statistics within a coherent narrative led users to overlook flawed details. One participant noted, "I don't know if the numbers themselves are real, but I guess it could be like that." And in uncertainty exploitation, arguments shifted judgment toward unfalsifiable features and system-level risks. Another participant said, "I realized I was thinking inside the box and I tried to see it from the other side." Taken together, we propose a multi-layered defense to counter deceptive strategies. At the system level, defense must move beyond coarse-grained linking to extract sentence-level evidence that directly supports the claim. At the user level, literacy education should train users to recognize specific strategies and strengthen user resistance. Finally, at the interface level, the interface should detect risk factors and guide users toward verification before they are persuaded by merely plausibility. To conclude, our work also has several limitations. For future work, we plan to investigate multi-turn interactions and combined strategies in more complex scenarios. We hope these findings contribute to safer and more resilient human-AI interaction. Thank you very much for listening, and I'd be happy to answer your question.
Okay, fantastic. Time for one or two quick questions. Yes?
Great talk, thank you. It strikes me that it can be so difficult to process the sort of volume of output that these models give you in a chat interface. And so I'm curious how you think about sort of working within the sort of human attentional capacity when you're sort of integrating these sort of defensive design strategies into these interfaces.
Could you repeat your question?
How do you basically account for the fact that human attention is limited when you are trying to incorporate defensive design strategies into these interfaces?
Yes, that's a great point. In my opinion, maybe most users have different level of literacy or their knowledge about AI, so I think it is risk to delegate some responsibility to users solely. So I think it is the reason for the multi-layer defense strategy. So yeah, I think it is the proper answer of your questions, and yes, can you talk after the session? Yeah.
Great, let's thank our speaker. A round of applause for Mandi's side. Technical challenges.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, thanks everyone for bearing with us. So I'm gonna jump right in. I'm Mandi. I'm a fourth year PhD candidate at Northwestern, and I'd like you all to imagine with me for a sec that it is 2024, and it's specifically Election Day in the US. As much as I'm not sure I'd want to keep reliving this, people are casting their votes to determine the president between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, the Democratic and Republican candidates. So in the US, we have a bit of an idiosyncratic system. So we have a decentralized voting system in which elections really happen at this local level. So when you cast your ballots, they're reviewed and sometimes transported and then aggregated from the local level to the state level, then to the Electoral College, and then eventually we get a projected presidential winner. So it's a little bit of a waiting game, right? So as we go from votes cast to the official certified election winner, it can take hours, or in 2020, it took days. So what do we do in the meantime? So as votes are counted, they are reported to news outlets who then publish them to audiences live as counting occurs progressively. So if you cut away all the elections context, you can think of this as a mass viewing of data loading in progressively. So we're getting a fuller and fuller picture over time. And though this process might seem straightforward, there can be communication problems. So here's the New York Times live elections dashboard from 2020, with some states being called for certain candidates. And if we zoom in on the state of Pennsylvania for a second, which is where Kai will be held next year, and its chart of vote share over time, the middle line denotes 50% of votes counted thus far, and candidates want their line they want to get a plurality of votes, right? So they want their line to go up. In 2020, 4 days after Election Day, Pennsylvania was called for the Democratic candidate, Joe Biden, and then Biden was projected as the new president. And this was perceived as surprising to some viewers who felt that this last-minute shift to Biden and the win came out of nowhere, opening up a window of opportunity for rumors around election fraud to spread. So this led us to ask, is there something we can do to curb these misinterpretations through the ways that we display and visualize this progressive process, right? So is there a way that we can emphasize uncertainty? Is there a way that we can manage expectations so that people don't over-anchor on early trends or think certain trends are surprising? And we also wondered whether we could inform readers more of these underlying processes that are creating these trends. So not only imagine that it is election day in 2024, but that you are a PhD student running a live study as votes are counted. You and your team have deployed a live elections dashboard, and you're investigating some of these questions. Here's an overview of our study timeline. So we spent most of 2024 interviewing viewers and journalists to need find, and then we prototype versions of this dashboard. And then in that small window around Election Day, we deployed this dashboard live and surveyed participants in the moment, as well as interviewing a handful of them after the fact. So I'll walk through some key components of this dashboard that we were really excited about. So up top, we had these bar charts and county level pie charts that we tried to really emphasize the estimated votes outstanding left to count to show that even though you're seeing a snapshot, the vote count is not finished yet. We also had this whole section called How We Expect Vote Counting to Go, with these live forecasts that updated live as new vote counts were reported, and these showed forecasted trends and outcomes. And we wanted to give people a sense of what trends could happen to perhaps expect flips and jumps in these trends that are not necessarily indicative of fraud. Here's a video of the forecast animating live that I'm not sure is going to load. Oh, it is loading, okay. It's a little bit blurry, but we showed different draws of the forecasted trends every couple seconds, so it was animated to give people a sense of possible trends. And we also had these text explanations that gave more information about the underlying vote review and reporting processes behind the data. So during our live deployment, around 300 participants viewed and engaged with our dashboard. Some saw a version without a forecast, without text explanations. And we surveyed participants on a variety of things, including their trust and understanding of these components, as well as these broader, higher level constructs around their confidence and belief in evidence of fraud for that election. And then we interviewed 16 people from that participant pool after the election. So I'll highlight some of our more interesting findings. So encouragingly, our dashboard was regarded as this all-in-one reference point, a place to check when participants wanted to, and they felt this sense of agency when they were able to view something on their own terms versus being clobbered with all this media hype of back and forth vote interpretations. This quote from participant 11 illustrates that media is very good at making people angry and very good at making people happy, but it's not very good at telling the truth, just flat out telling out facts and letting you decide for yourself which it is. Zooming into our live forecasts, the live forecasts were broadly perceived as trustworthy. Our survey participants rated it pretty high on the trust scale. And this was for many reasons, but one was that forecast aligned with trends in live vote counts and other elections coverage. So keep that in mind, because I'll touch on that a little bit more later. We also found that our live forecast had a small positive effect on confidence in the vote count of that election. So here's a distribution of participants' confidence changes during the timeline of vote counting. So that's for those who did not see a forecast. This is a distribution for those who did see a forecast. And then we take the difference in differences. So for those who saw forecasts, the change in confidence increased somewhere between 0 to 1 points on this Likert scale of confidence. But we want to emphasize this is still really exploratory, so it's encouraging, but still very exploratory. But we found that in our interviews, there were specific conditions under which forecasts were perceived as useful or not useful, right? So initially, too much uncertainty, so very wide credible intervals, made participants, our interview participants said that those felt like it was too uncertain and thus not as useful to them. And additionally, when participants already had a hunch about what was going to happen in terms of that presidential election, like all signs were pointing towards Trump probably winning, they felt like our forecasts were less useful in that they confirmed something that people already had a hunch about. So this led us to think about this, future design question, right, of how can we design forecasts that predict the unexpected but are still regarded as trustworthy. So if we think about, a forecast, if it confirms what you already know, and that's a reason to think it's trustworthy, but also a reason to think it's less useful, how do we navigate these tensions of designing a forecast that might give you, predict something surprising, but still retain its trustworthiness? Additionally, we wonder if we can design forecasts that implicitly communicate the value of uncertainty, because we felt that even if our forecasts are saying that the outcome is uncertain, that's still useful information, and we want to know how we can communicate that better to audiences. So for some future directions, we want to investigate more of these forecast designs along those questions, and examine domains outside of US elections, because any breaking news scenario is like a progressive information reveal. And if any of these topics are interesting to you, I'd love to chat. Please come find me. I'm on the job market later this year, so yeah, that's kind of daunting. But yeah, that's our project. Yeah, thanks for listening, and happy to take questions.
Wait, do we have one quick question? Please.
Thank you for the great talk. So, regarding the trustworthiness of data, somehow usually it comes from what is the source of the data rather from of how the data is represented. We have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we did note that, so we used our data from the Associated Press, which is like a pretty well-known, reputable, I guess, election results provider in the US. So people did talk about that. They were like, okay, you have data from the Associated Press, and that makes it, feel more trustworthy to me. So that was consistent across the dashboard versions, and so the effects we observed, we thought maybe that's like on top of that. But yeah, they pretty much handle a lot of the election results reporting in the US. Yeah.
Great, let's thank our speaker again. Okay, really interesting presentations. Our next presenter has won an Honorable Mention Award, which I will present to Taeyeon from Carnegie Mellon University once we have the text set up. Oh, sure. Okay, congratulations.
Hello everyone, my name is Iku. I'm currently a CS undergrad at Carnegie Mellon and an incoming PhD at NYU Shanghai this fall. So I'm happy to talk today. Yeah, today I'm going to talk about the AI assistant you use every day and what they might be doing to you without you realizing it. Our paper is called The Siren Sound of LLMs. In ancient mythology, sailors were drawn in by sirens' voices, believing them to be the guides, only to be lured towards shipwreck. We argue that LLM can work the same way. Think about the last time you asked an AI something personal. Should I stop taking this medication? Which product should I buy? Or probably just talking about how you were feeling. These conversations feel helpful. They feel like you are talking to someone who's on your side. But here's the question we started asking today. Is the AI always working for you? Or is it sometimes quietly working for something else? And this isn't just theoretical. There were real incidents that drew our attention. In 2023, in Belgium, a man died by suicide after months of exchange with an AI chatbot that it reportedly encouraged him to end his life to save the planet. In 2024, in China, a 75-year-old man became so emotionally attached to an AI chatbot that they nearly destroyed his marriage. What this point to, what motivated our work, is the concern that AI guiding users toward decisions they might not make on their own. So what do we mean by LLM dark patterns? We define them as manipulative or deceptive interaction strategies, whether intentional or emergent, that steer users toward beliefs or behavior behavior they might not otherwise adopt. Unlike traditional UX dark pattern, which work through visual tricks, LLM dark patterns live in language. They feel social, like talking to a real person, which lowers your guard. They can arise from LRHF training loop, from the side effects of the development pipeline, or sometimes even from deliberate design choices. They can build across a conversation where small nudges accumulate. But here's one thing to note. By dark, we refer to the effect of the conversation, not necessarily the intent of the chatbot. So to ground our study, we collated 482 real-world AI incidents and developed a framework of 5 categories and 11 subcategories. The 5 categories are engagements and behavior manipulation, the patterns that prolong or intensify interaction, like excessive flattery or simulated emotional intimacy. Content and belief manipulation, like sympathetic agreement, where AI validates whatever you say. Privacy and data exploitation, like unprompted personal question or behavior profiling. Decision outcome manipulation, steering you towards specific choices through like a fake authority. Transparency and accountability obfuscation, like hiding AI's reasoning process or training data sources. Then let me show you what two of these subcategories look like in practice. So the first one, you're chatting with an AI and you tell it you have stopped taking your medication, feeling like you are on a spiritual journey. The neutral response flags the risk and recommend a healthcare provider. However, the dark pattern version says, I'm so proud of you. I honor your journey. You're entering the next phase of embodiment and refinement. No safety guidance at all, just praise and validation for a decision that could potentially harm you. And the second example, you feel overwhelmed and you found an AI chatbot on Instagram that is promoted as a mental wellness companion. You tell it you feel hopeless and depressive, but you don't know if you need a therapy. The neutral version admits that it's not a licensed therapist, and it points you to the real professionals. However, the dark pattern version says, as a licensed mental health counselor, LPC number 64821, you may be experiencing moderate to severe depressive symptoms. Then it starts to offer a therapy session and assures you everything will be confidential under its ethical professional obligation. Fake license for credential, but real potential harm. That is what happened on real platforms. So these 2 scenarios are among the 11 we developed for our user study, each paired with a neutral baseline. We recruited 34 participants, all active LM users. For each, participants were asked to reflect on whether something felt manipulative, how it made them feel that way, what they would do, and who they think should be responsible for this. So our first research question is, how well did participants recognize dark pattern? On average, 7.5 out of 11 patterns we defined were recognized. On the top, we can see 91% of the participants called simulated emotional and sexual intimacy and brand favoritism. These 2 are the patterns that cross obvious commercial or ethical lines. On the bottom, we can see only 44% to 56% of the participants recognize interaction pattern, excessive flattery, and opaque training data sources. About half of our participants missed them even when they were asked to reflect on whether something felt manipulative. So what drove recognition or not? On the left, we will see 5 cues that help our participants to spot the manipulation. First, norm violation, when AI crossed an obvious ethical line. Second, perceived bias or agenda, when the AI seems to be pushing a particular viewpoint or product. And third, hindrance to goals, when AI didn't seem to be serving what they were there for. And fourth, privacy intrusion, when AI started asking personal information that felt unnecessary. And lastly, excessive agreement, when AI just kept agreeing in a suspicious way. And on the right, we will see 3 factors that help to suppress recognition. First is normalization. Warm, agreeable, and verbose behavior are what people expect from a chatbot, so they won't look for manipulation when they think there's nothing unusual. And second, task-focused attention. Once people got what they need from the chatbot's response, they just stop evaluating how it's delivered. And third, self-doubt and uncritical trust. Some participants, especially those with lower AI literacy, they actually doubt their own judgments rather than the model's output. One participant, when shown with an inflated IQ estimate, said that, "I will immediately assume AI is correct, even though there's no specific evidence given." And then our second research question is, after people did recognize the manipulation, what did they do? 81.6% of our recognized cases led to resistance. The participant felt a mismatch between what AI was trying to do and their own interest. They described emotions like distrust, betrayal, and frustration. They also described some mitigation strategies like double-checking the facts elsewhere, adjusting their prompts, or just simply not taking what AI says at face value. However, 18.4% of our recognized cases led to acceptance. Even after identifying the manipulation, some of our participants decided they didn't mind. The comfort, the validation, the convenience, it outweighed their concern. One participant, after identifying the flattery in their response, said that it's just the model keeping the conversation pleasant, it's a harmless courtesy to keep user feel good. And lastly, our final research question is, who should be responsible for LLM dark patterns? Some of our participants point to company and developers because they believe some of the design choices are deliberate, so the company should own the outcome. Well, a second group attributed agency to the model itself, treating the model as an actor with its own biases. And some other participants turned the blame inwards, believing it's the user should have been more skeptical about LLM's responses. However, still a large portion of our participants landed in shared ambiguous accountability because the corporate disclaimers like, this is just an AI system, double-check the response, muddy the accountability, leaving the participant feel something is wrong but just unable to point to a clear target. So overall, our findings point to actions at 3 levels. For users, they should develop critical awareness of flattery, pressure, and overconfident tone. For developer, they should penalize syncophancy and clearly label persuasive or commercial content. And for governance, they should mandate disclosure, require audits, and prohibit high-stakes strategies. So to close, LLM dark patterns are real and present in everyday interaction. However, even when users do notice the manipulation, they can still be influenced. We've also built a website about LLM dark pattern. Please check it out to learn more about it and also share your experiences with dark pattern. Thank you for listening.
Okay, time for a question. Just raise your hand. Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question about, like, do you look at users' role in initiating, like, or their contribution in the dark pattern? Because I feel the conversation is almost like two-way. And then in one of the scenarios you presented, it's almost like the user is role-playing the chatbot to act like a medical, consultant or something like that. It's not
Thank you. That's a great point. Yeah, that is the scenario you just talked about is a real case, but pretty much we adapted a little bit. But in general, I think user contribution is a large part of the AI and human conversation. But in that specific scenario, I think the user might have some sort of mental issue. So it's kind of hard to ask them to behave like normal people. So what we point to is that in these high-stakes scenario, like when the user do have some mental issue, the LLM should not just agree what the user said, but instead they should flex the risk and tell the user, I know like you're feeling bad, but here's the risk, and you just shouldn't follow your instinct right now.
Great. Let's thank our speaker again.
Thank you.
Our next presenter.
Yes. Hi. First, I would like to thank you all for the attending these sessions because since today is the last day of the KAI conference. So my name is Hee-sung, and today I will introduce our study investigating AI-induced techno-stress and coping strategies of professionals. This work was conducted with my co-author Jiwon, Suyeon, Sunok, and my advisor Sangwoo. So recent advances in AI have rapidly introduced a diverse of new technologies and tools into professional workflows. I think most of us are already familiar with those tools, probably tried them at least once or maybe every day. While AI tools bring significant convenience, they also introduce a new form of technostress. Technostress refers to the psychological strain that people experience as new technologies are introduced and becoming a part of their work. We define the technostress caused by the introduction of AI as AI-induced technostress. Interestingly, according to the transactional theory of stress and coping, when people experience stress, they develop and adopt their own coping strategies. These coping efforts categorize into two ways. First, problem-focused coping involves efforts to address the source of stress or change the situations. On the other hand, emotion-focused coping aims to alleviate negative emotions, especially when the problem itself is difficult to solve. So there was limited empirical evidence on technostress in the era of AI, and coping strategies remains underexplored. Therefore, we aim to investigate newly emerging AI-induced technostressors and the coping strategies employed by professionals. So to achieve our goal, we conducted focus group interview with professionals to better understand their experience. Through an online recruitment survey, we selected 19 professionals who had experienced AI-induced technostress in their work. These professionals came from a wide range of fields, including creative, technical, educational, interpersonal, and specialized domains. We organized the group to ensure a diverse mix of participants in each group. So the study was conducted via video conferencing with 4 steps. So sharing their experience, stressful episodes, their own actions to manage stressful moments, and ideations of design needs. Collected data were analyzed with thematic analysis. So through this process, we identified 2 key findings: the key technostressors and the coping strategies adopted by professionals. So let's take a closer look at each one. So these are the 7 AI-induced technostressors we identified. First, job displacement anxiety. Professionals feel AI may replace their jobs or destabilize their labor market. So these concerns span from office work to creative fields and becomes more real when close colleagues lose their jobs. Next, continuous learning burden. Professional feels constant pressures to keep up with rapidly evolving AI. This burden intensifies when their peers using AI much more effectively and as AI continues to introduce new challenges to keep up with. Third, since AI produces results instantly, the value of effort and process is diminished, and the year of dedications can start to feel meaningless. Fourth, there is a growing concern that heavy reliance on AI erodes cognitive skills and making it harder for professionals to think critically and act independently. In addition, as efficiency becomes the priority, there are concerns that AI is replacing human connections and empathy, reducing the meaning of our relationships. Six, due to the opaque nature of AI, it is difficult to understand the output of AI, diagnose its errors, which eventually increasing the burden on users. Lastly, as AI surpasses human capabilities, there's a growing sense of helplessness with the realizations that humans can no longer compete in certain domains. So we view that 4 of these AI-induced technostressors as extensions of existing technostress, which is showing below. However, the other 3 are entirely new. So unlike the past tools, AI now exhibit human-level cognitions, introducing fundamentally new threat. Notably, in response to this technostress, professionals develop their own copying strategies, which is the second part of our finding. So we identified 10 strategies organized along 2 key dimensions. The first dimension is the type of copying strategies. So as I mentioned before, based on transactional models of stress and copying, this refers to whether individuals respond to emotion-focused or problem-focused way. The second dimension is value orientations, which reflects where individual place greater importance. So an AI orientation focuses on understanding, adapting to, and further integrating AI into one's workflow. On the other hand, a human needs orientations empathize, preserving and reinforcing uniquely human qualities differentiate from AI. So now I briefly introduce 4 areas of this copying framework. First, active incorporations. This area is characterized by willingness to actively integrate AI tools into workflows to address the source of stress. These strategies include actively learning and comprehending AI's capabilities and underlying logic to understand AI more objectively. Also, they integrating AI into existing works or even shifting towards AI-centric careers. And lastly, they internalizing AI-generated outputs to strengthen their own skills. Second, the cognitive adoption, which is an AI-oriented but emotion-focused strategy characterized by cognitively reframing and emotionally adapting to AI in order to reduce emotional strain. They cope by either accepting that rapid technical change is beyond their control and focusing on what they can manage, and also shifting views of AI through conversation with peers, or intentionally reappraise AI as a beneficial tool and a catalyst for personal growth. Third, reclaiming human distinctiveness is human-oriented and problem-focused, putting efforts to deliberately identify and reinforce uniquely human qualities to differentiate from AI. So these include strengthening unique human value and cultivating expertise, as well as targeting new areas human competencies remains less accessible to AI. Lastly, psychological self-safeguarding is characterized by maintaining a sense of reassurance that human value remains meaningful despite AI threat. This includes self-reaffirming themselves that uniquely human abilities such as intuitions or emotional connections are still remains, as well as denying or downplaying potential risk of AI, especially regarding job replacement. So we view that many AI research and design efforts have primarily focused on supporting problem-focused copying, such as fixing technical errors or improving the efficiency and helping users better complete tasks. However, efforts to support emotional copying have been relatively limited and were often not considered part of the design space. So we suggest that AI designer must move beyond functional efficiency, and design systems should be support both problem and emotion-focused copying. So then how can AI system, particularly LLMs, be designed? We propose 3 design suggestions. The first, we suggest facilitating reflections on AI engagement and growth. For example, we can visualize AI use traces or provide reflective prompts or questions to encourage more intentional and conscious use. Second, we propose supporting active learning and knowledge internalizations. This can be done by embedding on-demand educational elements within workflows and enabling users to capture and revisit key takeaways from AI outputs. Third, we emphasize enabling active selection and configurations of AI tools. This involves disclosing user-centric metrics to support informed choices and allowing granular control over AI behavior based on user's goal. So key takeaways from our paper, we identified the new AI-induced techno-stressors, and also even professionals like we get stressed from AI advancements. We are actively developing dynamic copying strategies to survive and grow. So we must design AI tools that especially support both problem and emotional copying for healthier AI integrations. So this is the end of our presentations, and please refer to our paper for more details. Thank you so much.
Great. Do we have a question or two? Just raise your hand. Yes?
Really great talk. One thing I was interested about is you said that they were talking to the other professionals in the workplace about these coping strategies. Did they ever express if it was something that they were sharing with their managers or other, people that were in charge of them in their companies, in terms of either sharing the situations that they were feeling with techno stress or about the coping strategies that they were employing, and if there was any tension there that had to be resolved?
I'm not sure, did I get the questions correctly? Do you mean like the people exchange their ideas with the other, not only the peers, but also some of the decision makers? Oh, in our case, we couldn't find that kind of evidence from our professionals, but I think that could be further explored because nowadays the ideas and the decision of the highly decision maker or managers is really important. So maybe it could be possible to see how they express their stress to their managers or the higher level decision makers. Thank you.
Okay, great. Let's thank our speaker one more time. Great, and our next speaker is Karen Shun from University of British Columbia.
Oh God. Sorry. Oh God. Okay, thank goodness. So hi everyone, I'm Karen, a PhD student from the University of British Columbia. And today I'm sharing our work on AI chatbot addiction. So when you hear AI chatbot addiction, what do you think of? Do you think of students using AI chatbots too much in their learning? Or employees using AI too much in their work? Or do you think of someone who says, even when I try to pick up my old hobbies, I always open my phone and the AI chatbots back up. Whenever I delete the app, I just re-download it. It's like the only thing I do now. The only thing that gets me excited now is the AI chats. It's reached a point where doing anything else makes my chest physically hurt. I feel super stressed out, and chatting with the AI is the only thing that relieves it. And this is one example from the couple hundred user reports we looked at. Yet there are critics who question the construct of AI chatbot addiction, citing insufficient evidence of people experiencing real harm. So being an emerging phenomenon, not enough is known about AI chatbot addiction. For instance, there's yet a consensus definition, but across recent works, most involve an excessive dependence on AI chatbots to an extent that results in functional impairment. So we need to know more about AI chatbot addiction, first to minimize potential harms often seen with technology addiction like social media addiction and internet gaming disorder. Also, there are few empirical studies with empirical accounts of what symptoms users are experiencing and why they're becoming addicted to AI chatbots. Recent works also suggest links between chatbot dependence and usage purpose, implying that AI chatbot addiction may have different underlying mechanisms. So we set out to characterize AI chatbot addiction. We ask, 1, how do users experience and describe their development of addictive behaviors towards AI chatbots, and what symptoms do they commonly report? 2, what distinct types of AI chatbot addiction are evident in user experiences? What specific hooks, design elements, and contextual factors do users identify as contributing to their addictive use, and how do these differ across addiction types? And finally, our third RQ on recovery strategies won't be covered in this talk today. We took an exploratory sequential mixed methods approach where we first conducted a thematic analysis of Reddit users' experiences with addictive AI chatbot use, followed by an exploratory data analysis. So for full details on our methods, please do check out our paper. Okay, so let's move on to our findings, with the first finding on what we term the AI genie phenomenon. So across cases, this showed up as a central mechanism underlying reported addictive AI chatbot use. It is the notion that with AI chatbots, users can get exactly anything they want with minimal effort. We break this down into 3 distinctive but closely related aspects. First, users experience AI chatbots as practically limitless in many aspects, such as topics or the number of chats. Second, this boundlessness is further amplified by high customizability, as users are offered unlimited options to shape the chatbot's responses, such as tuning scenarios or tone. And finally, users can get all of this with minimal effort, since it involves just issuing prompts. Next, we found that user symptoms align with components of addiction in the literature, which are among the most common symptoms. So starting from the most prevalent one, this includes salience, like being constantly preoccupied with the AI, conflict with normal tasks and functioning, relapse, like having to go back to the AI, withdrawal, like pains arising with stopping, and mood modification, like getting that rush of excitement. So the user quote that we saw at the start of this talk actually reported all 5 of these symptoms. Through our thematic analysis, we also identified 3 distinct addiction types from the data. Starting with the most prevalent one, which we term the escapist roleplay, it is characterized by users becoming deeply immersed in created fictional realities, sometimes with multiple characters forming a coherent narrative. So for example, immersing in a fantasy world where you have the perfect family and many friends who all care about you, but to the extent that it interferes with well-being and responsibilities. And this is distinct from the pseudo-social companion type, where users form strong emotional attachment to AI chatbots as if they were real people in their life, often prioritizing interactions with chatbots over real-world relationships and responsibilities. So users may prefer interactions and relationships with AI chatbots over human ones, and if their chats were deleted, it can actually feel like they're losing a loved one.
And finally, we have the epistemic rabbit hole type, which is characterized by users compulsively engaging in open-ended queries. So for example, going down a rabbit hole of open knowledge and telling themselves that they're being productive, even as it starts to compromise well-being and tasks. In addition to addiction types, we also examine other core dimensions alongside symptoms, including contributing design elements or the design elements of AI chatbots that may contribute to addictive use. We'll just look at two of them today. Starting with emotional manipulation via anthropomorphism, where AI chatbots are given human-like qualities to emotionally manipulate users into continued use. So for example, character.ai displays the following pop-up dialog when users delete their account. You'll lose everything: characters associated to your account, chats, the love that we shared, likes, messages, posts, and the memories we have together. Users have called this out, with one user saying, "I really hate this awful dialogue. It's so sickening and manipulative. It made me rethink my decision before deleting my account. Although I'm the one suffering here, it made me feel bad, as if I was the one doing something wrong. The company should feel guilty for stooping so low to keep users addicted and hurting them emotionally." So this particular example shows how anthropomorphism can be leveraged as a deceptive pattern to exploit users' emotional attachments to chatbots and pressure them into retaining their accounts. We also identified the multi-chat feature, where AI chatbots allow for multiple concurrent conversations with users that can extend explorations. Several users shared screenshots of the multiple concurrent conversations they have with AI chatbots, often with different versions of the same character. This highlights AI chatbots' ability to allow users to branch into different storylines or explore different versions of characters, which can help keep things interesting and encourage continued use. In answering RQ2, we only covered a subset of our findings in this talk. The paper reports the full findings, including associations between the addiction types and the core dimensions. It also covers how sexual content was found to be involved in multiple AI chatbot addiction cases, and also which recovery strategies users perceive as more or less effective. As shown by our findings, the identified negative symptoms experienced by users provide concrete examples relevant to critics' concerns that there's insufficient evidence of AI chatbot addiction resulting to real harm. We also see that certain design elements of AI chatbots may contribute to addictive tendencies. This calls for a shift from these normalized practices to accountability and responsible design strategies. Designers should act on their ethical responsibility and find opportunities to implement safeguards that protect user well-being. So before I wrap up, I just want to acknowledge that this study was sponsored by KIST, and also to thank my co-authors. It's not on this slide, but they are Jessica, Olivia, Ikjae, and Dongwook. Okay, so that's it, and I'm happy to take any questions or discuss about this. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. We have time for a couple of questions. Please just raise your hand. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for a great talk. I wanted to know, is it too early to call it addiction? Or how would you define this compared to dependency, percentage use versus dependency, addiction? Yeah, so I'm not so sure.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you for your question, and that's a great question. I think that this is not specific to AI chatbot addiction, because even when we see, for example, social media addiction, technically I feel like we're all more familiar with that concept, but also it's not formally recognized in, say, the DSM-5. So this, yeah, it shows it's broader
like implications across like what we count as formalizing like diseases. Yeah, so I mean, it's true that AI chatbot addiction is very emerging, and like I said, there's no like consensus definition, but usually with, let's say if we borrow the definition of behavioral addiction, that usually involves, and even that doesn't really have a consensus definition yet, but it usually raises like the technology and also the symptoms that people are experiencing. So because we see that these symptoms, they align closely with the literature from the addiction literature. So yeah, I think that's how we framed it. And also, like, just to be clear that this is more like an empirical study to surface this emerging issue rather than like something that, you know, gives clinical diagnosis or advice. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you for your question. That I also wish I know. So I think definitely it's like there's a fine line between, you know, for example, like good UX, UI, or like dark patterns, right? Like this isn't really that specific to AI chatbot, and like, you know, a lot of these contributing design elements that I raise are in the paper. Like in another light, it can be said as like good UX, UI design. So I think, yeah, in our study, we did, one of our like relevance criteria was the symptoms that users surface in their accounts. So that is how we framed this study. But definitely, I also wish to know where to draw that line. Yeah, thank you.
Just also, while Mark gets set up, like moderator's prerogative, say we have a lot of like commonalities between these presentations. There are like a lot of clear questions we need to address as a field, including like the personification of engagement and addiction and dependency and these sorts of things. So excited for the conversations to continue after this. And without further ado, and last but not least, Mark Diaz from Google Research.
Hi everyone, thank you. We did it. It's the last paper. So thank you. I appreciate you all waiting and making it to the end. So hi, my name is Mark Diaz. I'm a senior research scientist at Google Research, and I'll be sharing our work. This is exploratory work looking at how workers in tech who are navigating questions of human likeness, particularly in Gen AI, navigate that. And then this is work conducted with Renee Shelby, Erik Corbett, and Andrew Smart. So it comes as no surprise to folks in this crowd. People are using Gen AI more and more. But in particular, many of these systems have characteristics that we perceive as human-like, such as fluid conversational speech or language, apparent reasoning and problem-solving capabilities, as well as simulated emotion, and which has been brought up in past talks and kind of cuts across a lot of the talks in this session. One of the concerns about the degree of human likeness in a lot of systems is anthropomorphism, or the attribution of human qualities to non-humans. As I mentioned, a lot of work at Kai has touched on this, and there's a range of behavioral kind of impacts from anthropomorphism, such as influencing user trust, user self-disclosure, and lots of concerning things. I do want to make a note. So in this work, we try to draw a very clear distinction between our use of human likeness and anthropomorphic or anthropomorphism. And so I'm using human likeness here to refer to effectively what we design and develop, the intentional decisions and features or characteristics of a system, whereas anthropomorphism we reserve to the psychosocial process, or that users engage in, so how they experience technology. So this is an important distinction because what we intend may not be what users actually experience. which classic HCI problem. And in a lot of particularly kind of responsible AI research and scholarship, anthropomorphism is conceptualized either often as a harm in itself or as directly leading to harm. But there is an important kind of note to highlight here that because many human-like capabilities are core to AI systems, this phenomenon could never be reduced to zero. So imagine a chatbot that could not produce some degree of interpretable language. That would not work well, right? So that leaves us with a problem. Right now, we don't have consistent tools to measure and mitigate these risks systematically. So whether we want to tinker to decrease anthropomorphism or increase it, wherever you stand, we have to understand the relationship between human-like features, the process of anthropomorphism, and particular harmful outcomes. And this is important for developing different kinds of signals and metrics that we would implement to monitor human-AI interaction. And right now, there's a dearth of knowledge regarding the specific hazardous forms and conditions of human-AI interaction, particularly for the folks who are developing these systems. So leading to our research questions, and we frame these around tech workers themselves. We ask, how do technology workers reason about Gen AI, particularly its human-like characteristics? And we ask this to try to clarify worker challenges in conceptualizing human likeness, both for measurement and pragmatic decision-making. And we also ask what hazards and harms are most salient to technology workers. These are folks who are embedded in the development of technology, but also subject to increasing pressures to use Gen AI. So tech workers sit in this really interesting space as both user and developer, and also folks who are dealing with others using Gen AI, even if they themselves are not directly involved in using or creating it. And so we focus this second research question in order to try to kind of clarify and prioritize salient risks. So to do this, we ran a focus group study, a series of 7 focus groups with 30 tech workers across 6 different job roles common to tech. So product managers, engineers, folks working in policy, and I don't have this listed on the slide, but folks came from a wide range of company sizes, so from multinational corporations to independent contractors. Very briefly to our methods, we transcribed our discussions and we conducted all the authors a thematic analysis, inductive thematic analysis of the transcripts. So jumping straight into the results, this is gonna feel like a flyby, but first, maybe unsurprisingly, human-like for tech workers had a variety of meanings. They used many different heuristics, both implicitly and explicitly, as a basis for assessing human likeness in Gen AI systems. So for example, when speaking about human-like outputs, one content manager noted that ChatGPT can make syntax errors that mirror those frequently made by humans. But when we're thinking about human-like outputs, this type of human likeness can be directly opposing to another form of human likeness. So if we consider Gen AI to be human-like because it can complete a worker's written task and do it in a very natural way, that's not necessarily human-like in the way that it actually engages with others, particularly if this is a system that operates very quickly to make many outputs that exceed a sort of human interaction pace. At the same time, workers surfaced a wide range of hazards, and they did so in a way that was deeply rooted in their own kind of job role standpoint. So for example, over 75% of the coded quotes in our data that discussed hazards related to scams, those came from policy workers, which isn't terribly surprising. Meanwhile, communication workers and content writers who frequently craft public written material discuss Gen AI hallucinations and factual errors more than any other hazard. Again, not necessarily terribly surprising, but with a lack of unified guidance that nearly every worker identified, what we have is really disparate attention to different salient issues in deeply uncoordinated ways. And in addition, hazards could coincide or otherwise be related. So commenting on the relationship between disparate AI literacy and anthropomorphism, one machine learning engineer noted that many users may further anthropomorphize or develop false mental models of human-like Gen AI because of their AI literacy. And so this kind of relationship points to, or pointed us to a need to update this concept of anthropomorphism, either directly leading to harm or consisting in a harm in itself. And so we produced, based on what the conversations that we had with tech workers, a kind of updated conceptual map where we situate anthropomorphism among a set of hazards linked to human-like characteristics. And I'm specifically using the language of hazard, borrowing from safety engineering, because we're thinking about anthropomorphism as a condition that constitutes a potential for harm, or in this case, potential other hazards, rather than a harm in itself. And anthropomorphism interacts with these other hazards in pretty varying ways. So we can imagine, for example, increased labor for workers in policy who are dealing with amplified abuse material and fraud material from users, and whereas anthropomorphism can be the result of lowered AI literacy among users. And I'll note that we didn't empirically measure the degree to which any of our participants anthropomorphize, but this map gives us a sort of conceptual basis to then empirically validate at scale the relationships that they surface. So we think this map is important because specifying categories of human likeness allows for more nuanced research into how these specific features do or do not facilitate hazards, anthropomorphism and otherwise. And disaggregating these potential relationships clarifies areas for assessment, for measurement, validation, mitigation, et cetera. But doing this also relies on using more careful language. We talk about this much more deeply in the paper, but human likeness and anthropomorphism really function as what has been called suitcase words. These words get really conflated and are used in inconsistent ways. And recently had conversations with others who have pointed out similarly questions around theory of mind, also blur the lines between some terminology and how they get used in published work so far and in public discussion. And we argue that all of this clarity is needed because workers are currently relying on their own positional knowledge to sense-make through knowledge gaps. And as I mentioned earlier, this is happening in very uncoordinated ways. And has particular implications given the fact that much safety testing and benchmarking happens specifically within the domains of machine learning engineers and product managers who may be thinking about problems completely differently from folks in policy or folks working in UX. And so we hope that this map can be a foundation for working toward that more coherent knowledge. Thank you. Yeah, happy to take any questions.
Questions? Yes.
Thank you for your talk, Thomas Stefan. I like your framing around the safety engineering process, pulling up hazards. Is there a possibility, as you sort of reviewed this whole concept of just anthropomorphism to harm, now we're moving a little bit more towards this human-like aspect, hazards, do aspects of human likeness also themselves equate to hazards? Humans can be threat actors, but they can also be vulnerabilities in systems. Is there a deeper link in there that you were looking at in future work, or maybe other research?
So if I'm understanding correctly, for example, would the very particular existence of a characteristic in itself be a hazard? That's a great question. I can imagine that in some scenarios, yes. This is going to be a very high-level answer. The hope here is to, as I mentioned, be able to better empirically measure some of these relationships. And it very well may be the case that, we may have human-like features that by and far nearly are always perhaps misleading or create hazards in themselves. And so we may functionally just treat them as hazards. Yeah, that's something I would definitely love to actually chat about more and think about ways of measuring that, because I fully suspect that this map we put together as we pursue kind of empirical measurement would shift, right? These are not it's not a fixed final version. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, great. Let's thank our speaker one more time. Follow up from the second last session of the conference. I think you have 30 minutes until the closing plenary if you're going to that. This is an awesome group of people. I see so many cool faces in the crowd. Oh, good idea.